I own a farm, a rather unusual kind of farm, a place that's always dark and wet. My farm isn't very big either. I keep it in the basement of my house, where the temperature is not too hot in the summer and not too cold in the winter. You've probably guessed by now that my farm is a worm farm. You might also wonder why anyone would want to raise earthworms. An earthworm isn't exactly a handsome creature, except maybe to another earthworm. It has very little in the way of a brain. It's hard to tell the front end from the back, because an earthworm doesn't have eyes or ears or a nose, and even its mouth is hard to see. These particular earthworms are known as red wrigglers, and they are greedy feeders. They will eat just about all of your kitchen waste. They eat fruit and vegetable peelings, coffee grounds, tea bags, and even eggshells. They turn all this waste into a kind of rich soil called vermicastings. By feeding on kitchen waste and litter, earthworms break it down and release the minerals that plants need for healthy growth. Worms also tunnel and squirm through the soil, turning it over, much the way a farmer does when he plows and fertilizes his land, mixing in oxygen and minerals for the new crops. In fact, earthworms are small, living recycling centers. So that's why I raise earthworms, and by doing this, I get some of the best natural fertilizer in the world. I harvest and add the worms' vermicastings to my garden, and now my potted plants, flowers and vegetables are the envy of the neighborhood. Let me show you how easy it is to get started with a worm farm. We went to a free smart gardening workshop and purchased a kit called a Wriggly Ranch. We also bought about a pound of worms. That's about 1,000. In time, these will multiply into hundreds of thousands. Our kit came with good instructions and was pretty easy to assemble. There were 3 trays altogether, but for a start we'll only use 1 tray and we'll set the other 2 aside for later. The worms need bedding so they can burrow, and this was supplied in the kit. First of all, though, we had to soak it in a bucket filled with about, 3/4 full of warm water. There's no need to remove the wrapper, because the worms will eventually eat that too. After about 15 minutes, the block of bedding swells up to about 4 times its size and crumbles easily. We're going to place the cardboard display on the bottom of the first working tray. This will prevent the bedding from falling through the holes. The bedding itself is made of coconut husks, and the worms love to eat that too. When the soaked bedding is crumbly, we will distribute it over the cardboard and leave it to cool down to room temperature before we add the worms. Worms are quite particular about temperature. Now we'll spread the worms over the bedding. Worms hate direct light, so we'll leave the lid off for a while to encourage them to burrow. Now we can place some food scraps on top of the bedding. I'm going to put a wet sheet of newspaper on top to prevent the bedding from drying out. Worms must have moisture because they breathe through their skin, and they'll die if their skin becomes dry. Now comes the hardest part of all. We have to wait. Several months. Worms may take some time to adjust to their new home, and in the meantime we mustn't overfeed them. They don't like moldy food any more than you do. Too much food and your worm farm will have a garbage dump odor. It should have a good earthy smell, just like the outdoors after a rain shower. We're going to leave the tap open at the bottom and put a container under it to collect the worm tea. This is a wonderful liquid fertilizer for our houseplants and flowers. After several months, you should have close to a full tray of castings, which look like rich, dark soil. We're going to remove the lid and put any uneaten food and damp newspaper cover into the second working tray, and this fits above the first one. We'll add more food scraps into the new tray, and eventually the worms will move up into the new tray and their own castings will provide the new bedding. It will take several months for this second tray to fill with castings, so once again you have to be very patient. While you're waiting for the worms to do their magic, you can imagine the wonderful flowers you will soon have in your garden. Soon you'll have a working worm farm, and as well as producing the most wonderful natural fertilizer for a glorious garden, you'll be doing your part to help reduce waste going to our landfills.